Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we are taking on something huge, really personal, actually. We're trying to decode the human mind.
Yeah, no small task.
Definitely not. And this isn't just, skimming a textbook. We've really gathered sources covering some foundational psychology. We're talking breakthrough experiments, the biology underneath it all.
And some really startling, sometimes counterintuitive stuff about, like, our social instincts and even how our memories work or maybe don't work the way we think.
Exactly. So for you listening, our mission here is to try and cut through all that complexity.
Right. We want to pull out the really crucial findings, the things that form the bedrock of how psychologists understand things today, give you a solid foundation for thinking about perception, memory, social interaction, how much that shapes us.
And I think we have to start, really, by acknowledging why psychology needs to be such a rigorous science. Because left to our own devices, well, people are surprisingly bad intuitive scientists.
Oh, absolutely. We're constantly collecting data in our daily lives, right? But we interpret it, well, often pretty poorly. We tend to grab onto explanations that just feel right.
Without really testing them.
Exactly, without testing them thoroughly. We're just riddled with cognitive biases, motivational biases, all sorts of things that lead us to, frankly, wrong conclusions about why people do what they do, including ourselves.
We think we know the reasons, but maybe we're just filling in blanks based on what's easy or what we already believe.
Precisely. And that's where the scientific method comes in. It's the essential structure. Sometimes it feels a bit brutal, but it's what psychologists rely on to try and counteract that, that innate human fallibility.
Okay, so let's unpack this method then. It's not just a vague idea. It's a specific set of assumptions, procedures, ways to keep us honest, basically. What are the core pillars?
Well, we generally rely on 4 core principles. The first one is empiricism.
Empiricism, okay.
This just means that our understanding comes from systematic observation. We have to look and measure. Now, in chemistry, maybe that's straightforward. You watch the reaction.
Right, see the color change, whatever.
Yeah. But for cognitive psychology, well, mental processes, things like thoughts, beliefs, goals, you can't see those directly. They're invisible.
So if the mind is invisible, how does empiricism even work? How do you observe something you can't see?
It forces us to be clever. That's the short answer. We have to use indirect measurements. So, for example, if we want to study something like attention span, we don't try to peek inside someone's head. We look at their reaction time when we say, change a stimulus on a screen, or we measure how accurately they recall information presented earlier. We're observing the measurable outcomes.
Like buying cereal or choosing a bag.
Exactly, those observable behaviors. And we use those to infer the underlying invisible cognitive processes that must have led to that outcome.
Okay, that makes sense. You look at the footprint, the observable result, to try and figure out the steps the mind took. What's the second pillar?
That would be determinism.
Determinism.
This is a fundamental assumption. It's the idea that behaviors have underlying causes. There are reasons why things happen. And the whole point of research, of building theories, is to identify those cause and effect relationships.
So understanding basically means finding the if X, then Y.
Pretty much. If we can reliably say that X causes Y, then we've developed a theory about that behavior. We understand its cause, its determinant.
Got it. And these theories, they can't just sit there looking nice. They have to be put to the test, right?
Yeah.
Which sounds like testability.
Precisely. That's the third principle. A theory isn't scientific if you can't test it. It has to be stated clearly enough so that it could be evaluated and potentially proven false through observation.
So it's not enough for it to sound good. You need to be able to design an experiment or an observation that could show it's wrong.
Exactly. Think of the scientific process as like a competitive arena for ideas. Different theories make different predictions about what we should observe. Research studies are constantly pitting those predictions against reality, against the data.
It's like survival of the fittest for explanations.
That's a good way to put it. Only the ideas that are consistent with the objective data get to stick around. The others fall away.
Okay, so empiricism, determinism, testability. What happens if you have 2 theories that both seem to pass the tests? They both explain the data you have so far. How do you choose?
That's where the 4th principle comes in. Parsimony.
Parsimony. Sounds like being frugal.
Kind of. It's basically the tiebreaker principle. It says, all else being equal, prefer the simply explanation over the more complex one.
Simpler is better.
If they both account for the same data, yes.
Yeah.
Imagine you have theory A. It explains, say, memory consolidation using 2 brain chemicals. Nice and straightforward. Then you have theory B. It explains the exact same memory data, but it needs 10 chemicals, 3 hypothetical brain regions we haven't found yet, and a bunch of extra steps.
That sounds unnecessarily complicated.
Exactly. Parsimony says stick with theory A. It's simpler, it's easier to work with, easier to test further, at least until new data comes along that the simpler theory can't explain. Then you might need that complexity. But don't add it unless you absolutely have to.
Keep it simple, stupid. The KISS principle, but for science.
Pretty much. It helps keep theories grounded and prevents them from becoming unnecessarily elaborate.
All right, so that's the philosophy behind it. Let's get into the actual nuts and bolts, the mechanics of doing the research. The type of study you choose really dictates what kind of conclusions you can draw, right?
Absolutely. The design is critical. We can think about 3 main architectures, starting with what's called descriptive research.
Descriptive, like just describing things.
Yeah. Essentially, yes. The goal here is just to create a snapshot, a picture of what thoughts, feelings, or behaviors look like right now in a specific group, or maybe even just one person.
And the most detailed version of that is the case study, isn't it?
Right. That's where you do an incredibly deep dive into one unique individual or maybe a very small, distinct group. Like you might study one person with a very rare brain injury.
Our sources mentioned that really fascinating study by Milton Rokeach, the one with 3 patients in a psychiatric hospital.
Yeah.
And each one was absolutely convinced he was Jesus Christ.
Exactly. That's a classic case study. Rokeach spent years observing them, interacting with them, documenting their beliefs, their interactions. You get incredibly rich, detailed information.
But the downside is?
The downside is you can't really generalize from just 3 very unusual individuals. What you learn might be totally unique to them. It gives you hypotheses, maybe, but not broad conclusions about people in general.
So to get a broader picture, you'd use something else within descriptive research.
Yeah, that's where surveys come in. You administer questionnaires or interviews to a much larger sample of people to get a picture of their beliefs, attitudes, or reported behaviors.
Like political polling, or asking people about their consumer habits.
Exactly. Surveys give you breadth where case studies give you depth.
But surveys have their own problems, don't they? People don't always answer accurately.
Oh, definitely not. Surveys have real limitations. There's selective memory. People might honestly forget what they did or thought, or they might misremember in a way that makes them look better. That's social desirability bias.
And even just how you word the question can change the answer, right?
Hugely. Subtle changes in question wording can absolutely nudge people towards a particular response. So even your descriptive snapshot from a survey might be a bit skewed depending on how well it was designed.
Okay, so descriptive gives us a picture. Now let's move to probably the most common type of study you hear about, correlational studies.
Right. Correlational research is about looking for relationships. You systematically observe groups, you measure 2 or more variables, and you see if they tend to go together.
So you're not manipulating anything, just watching.
Exactly. The researcher is hands-off in terms of intervention. They're just recording how things naturally occur. You measure a variable A, you measure variable B, and you see if there's a pattern.
The sources use that cereal price example.
Yeah, that's a good simple one. You observe the price of a particular cereal in different stores or over time, that's one variable, and you observe how many boxes are purchased. That's the second variable.
And you might find a negative correlation. As the price goes down, buying goes up.
Precisely. Or a positive correlation. Maybe taller people tend to weigh more, or you might find 0 correlation. Maybe hair color has no relationship to intelligence. Correlational studies tell us if and how strongly variables are related and in what direction.
Okay, but here's the big caveat, the one everyone hammers home. Correlation doesn't equal causation.
This is the critical insight. You absolutely cannot conclude from a correlation alone that one variable causes the other. Just because price drops and buying increases doesn't necessarily mean the price drop caused the increase in buying.
Why not? It seems obvious in that case.
It seems obvious, but even there you have to be careful. The fundamental problem is that you can't rule out other explanations when you're just observing. There are 2 main issues. One is the directionality problem. Did A cause B or did B cause A?
Okay.
And the even bigger one, usually, is the common causal variable problem, often called the third variable problem.
The third variable, this is the idea that something else might be causing both things you're measuring.
Exactly. There might be some third unmeasured factor that's influencing both of your variables, creating the illusion of a direct link between them.
Give us that classic example again.
The ice cream sales and shark attacks.
Right.
If you just measure ice cream sales and the number of shark attacks, you'll find a positive correlation. They go up together in the summer.
But eating ice cream doesn't cause shark attacks.
Of course not. The common causal variable, the third variable, is temperature. Hot weather causes both more people to buy ice cream and more people to go swimming in the ocean, which increases the chance of shark encounters. The heat causes both. The ice cream and the attacks aren't directly linked causally.
So correlational studies are great for identifying relationships that exist in the real world, for prediction even.
Yes, very valuable for prediction. If two things are correlated, knowing one tells you something about the other.
But if you want to say X causes Y, you need a different approach.
You absolutely do. To get at causality, you need the experiment. This is often considered the gold standard in research for that reason.
Because in an experiment, the researcher takes control.
Precisely. The experimenter actively manipulates the variable they think is the cause that's the independent variable. They create different levels or conditions of that variable.
Like giving one group a drug and another group a placebo.
Exactly. Drug versus placebo is the manipulated independent variable. Then, crucially, they keep everything else the same. They control all other conditions.
To rule out those third variables.
Right. And then they measure the outcome they're interested in. That's the dependent variable. Did the drug group have different symptoms, the dependent variable, than the placebo group?
And because you manipulated the independent variable and controlled everything else, if you find a difference in the dependent variable,
you can be much more confident in concluding that the manipulation of the independent variable caused the change in the dependent variable. The experiment allows you to isolate the causal factor.
Though you mentioned earlier, true experiments aren't always possible, especially with humans, right? Particularly in development.
That's a really important limitation. You can't ethically or practically randomly assign children to grow up in poverty versus wealth or with supportive versus neglectful parents to see the effects. Those are crucial factors, but we can't manipulate them experimentally.
So what do researchers do then?
They often use what are called quasi-independent variables. Instead of manipulating, they group subjects based on existing characteristics, things like age, gender, socioeconomic status, maybe a clinical diagnosis like depression versus no depression.
So you compare these pre-existing groups?
Yes. You compare, say, the cognitive performance of older adults versus younger adults. Age is the quasi-independent variable. It allows for comparisons and helps us understand group differences. But because you didn't randomly assign people to be old or young, you lose that pure causal certainty of a true experiment. There might be other systematic differences between those groups besides age.
It's like a compromise between correlation and true experimentation.
It's a necessary and valuable compromise in many areas of psychology where true experiments are impossible.
Okay, so even when you design the best study possible, whether it's correlational or experimental, things can still go wrong. There are limitations, or what researchers call threats to validity. Let's talk about construct validity first.
Construct validity is a tricky but fundamental issue. It basically asks, are you really measuring what you think you're measuring?
How so?
Well, psychology studies abstract concepts. Things like intelligence, anxiety, self-esteem, aggression. These are theoretical constructs, abstract ideas. The challenge is translating that abstract idea into a concrete, measurable variable.
Like turning anxiety into a score on a questionnaire.
Exactly. Or measuring aggression by counting how many times a child hits a doll. Construct validity is about how well that measured variable, the questionnaire score, the number of hits, actually captures the essence of the conceptual variable, anxiety, aggression.
And it might not.
It might not. Your questionnaire might accidentally be measuring general stress levels instead of clinical anxiety. Or maybe counting hits on a doll doesn't fully capture the nuances of real-world aggression. If your measurement isn't accurately reflecting the concept, then your conclusions, no matter how well the study was run otherwise, are built on a shaky foundation. It threatens the validity of your construct.
Okay, that makes sense. Then there's internal validity. This sounds more about the experiment itself.
It is. Internal validity applies primarily to experiments where you're trying to make causal claims. It's the extent to which you can be confident that the changes in your dependent variable were actually caused by the manipulation of your independent variable and not by some other uncontrolled factor.
So it's about trusting the cause and effect conclusion.
Precisely. If internal validity is high, you've done a good job ruling out alternative explanations for your results. If it's low, maybe something else crept in and influenced the outcome.
And a major threat here is experimenter bias.
Right. Yes, this is a classic one. It's when the experimenter's own expectations or beliefs about the study subtly, often unconsciously, influence how they treat the participants or interpret the data, leading to results that confirm their expectations.
You mentioned that rat study earlier. That seems like a perfect example.
It really is. The students were told their rats were either genetically bright or dull maze learners, even though they were all standard lab rats.
And the bright rats learned faster.
According to the students' data, yes. The students who expected their rats to be intelligent somehow treated them differently, maybe handled them more gently, paid closer attention, or were slightly more generous in timing their maze runs in ways that actually produced better performance. Their expectations biased the results.
So the experimenter's belief became a self-fulfilling prophecy, contaminating the data.
Exactly. It undermines internal validity because the outcome wasn't just due to the rat's actual ability, which was the same, but also due to the experimenter's biased behavior.
And the solution to that is the double-blind procedure.
That's the gold standard solution. In a double-blind experiment, neither the participants nor the experimenters who are interacting with them or measuring the outcome know who is in which condition, who got the real drug and who got the placebo.
Takes expectations out of the equation for everyone involved.
Right. It neutralizes that potential for bias from either side, strengthening the internal validity and our trust in the causal conclusion.
Okay, one last crucial piece regarding research methods. Ethics. Psychology has a history, doesn't it? Some famous studies pushed boundaries.
It certainly does. And ethical considerations are paramount now. The fundamental guideline is a cost-benefit analysis.
Weighing the pros and cons.
Exactly. Research ethics committees weigh the potential costs to the participants, things like physical or psychological stress, potential harm, breaches of confidentiality, maybe moral violations against the potential benefits of the research.
What are the benefits usually?
Primarily advancing scientific knowledge, understanding human behavior better, which could lead to new therapies, better educational practices, improved social policies, and so on. But the potential benefit must significantly outweigh the potential cost or risk to the individual participant.
A big sticking point here is deception. Sometimes researchers don't tell participants the true purpose of the study.
Right. Deception is sometimes used because knowing the true purpose would change how people behave, invalidating the results. Think about studying conformity or obedience. If people know you're studying whether they'll conform, they might deliberately resist or comply just to mess with the study.
So sometimes it seems necessary for the science.
Proponents argue it's sometimes necessary to study behavior realistically, but it's ethically controversial. Critics argue strongly for complete truthfulness, saying deception violates trust and the participants' right to informed consent.
Nowadays, if deception is used, it has to be absolutely justified, minimal, and participants must be fully debriefed afterwards, told the true nature of the study and why deception was used.
Absolutely. Debriefing is crucial. And the ethical landscape really shifted after studies like Milgram's obedience experiment.
The shock experiment, yeah, that caused a huge stir.
It did. While the findings were incredibly important, giving us insights like agency theory about obedience to authority, the ethical cost was very high. Participants experienced extreme emotional distress, believing they were genuinely harming another person.
They weren't actually harming anyone, but they thought they were.
Exactly. The psychological stress was real and intense, and partly because of the ethical fallout from Milgram and similar studies, research involving that level of potential emotional harm is largely not conducted anymore. The field has become much more sensitive, much more protective of participant well-being. The ethical bar is significantly higher now.
Which is definitely a good thing.
Unquestionably.
All right, we've talked about how we study the mind, the rules, the methods, the ethics. Now let's get into the machinery itself, the biological foundation. Where does all this thinking and feeling actually happen? It starts with the nervous system, right?
Yes, the body's information superhighway. It's fundamentally divided into two main parts. You've got the central nervous system, or CNS, that's the command center, the brain and the spinal cord.
Brain and spinal cord, got it.
And then you have the peripheral nervous system, the PNS. This is basically everything else. All the nerves branching out from the CNS, connecting it to your skin, your muscles, your glands, your organs. It carries messages back and forth between the command center and the rest of the body.
And the basic building block, the fundamental cell doing the communicating in both systems, is the neuron.
The neuron, that's the star player. Each one is a tiny electrochemical unit designed for communication.
Let's break it down. What are the main parts of a neuron?
Okay, you have the soma, which is the cell body. It contains the nucleus, keeps the cell alive. Then, branching out from the soma, you have these tree-like structures called dendrites.
Dendrites. They look like receivers.
That's exactly what they are. Dendrites collect information, receiving signals from thousands of other neurons. They're the input channels.
Okay, so info comes in through the dendrites, goes to the soma. Then what?
Then, if the signal is strong enough, it gets passed down the axon. The axon is a long, cable-like extension that transmits the signal away from the soma, often over quite long distances, to send the message to other neurons, or to muscles or glands.
And the signal traveling down the axon, that's electrical, right?
Yes, the signal within the neuron traveling along the axon is an electrical impulse called the action potential.
The action potential. And the key thing here is that it's all or nothing.
Exactly. It's like firing a gun or flushing a toilet, as the common analogy goes. The neuron has a threshold. If the incoming signals from the dendrites push the electrical charge past that threshold, bang. The action potential fires completely at its full strength every single time.
It doesn't fire weakly or strongly, just fires or doesn't fire?
Correct. It travels rapidly down the axon to the end.
But then it hits a gap, right? It can't just jump electrically to the next neuron.
Right. There's a tiny gap between the end of one neuron's axon and the dendrite of the next neuron. This junction area is called the synapse.
The synapse. So how does the message cross the gap?
It switches from an electrical signal to a chemical one. When the action potential reaches the end of the axon, it triggers the release of chemical messengers called neurotransmitters into that synaptic gap.
Neurotransmitters, these are the chemicals we hear about, like dopamine, serotonin.
Exactly. Those are all neurotransmitters. These chemicals float across the synapse and bind to specific receptor sites on the dendrites of the receiving neuron.
And it's a lock and key system.
Very much so. Each neurotransmitter, the key, has a specific shape that allows it to bind only to corresponding receptor sites, the locks, on the next neuron. If the key fits the lock, it delivers its message to the receiving neuron, making it either more or less likely to fire its own action potential.
So these chemicals are incredibly important for regulating everything.
Absolutely everything. Mood, sleep, learning, memory, movement. It all depends on the precise balance and action of these neurotransmitters.
Like the example in the sources, acetylcholine or HEA.
Yes, AOT is crucial. It plays a big role in muscle contraction, but also in regulating memory and sleep cycles. And importantly, a significant undersupply of AISH in the brain is strongly linked to the memory loss seen in Alzheimer's disease.
And this lock and key system is also how drugs often work, right?
Exactly. Drugs can interfere with this process. Agonists are drugs that mimic the action of a natural neurotransmitter. They're like a counterfeit key that still fits the lock and activates the neuron.
Okay. And antagonists?
Antagonists are drugs that block the action. They're like a key that fits in the lock but doesn't turn it, and it prevents the real key, the natural neurotransmitter, from getting in. So they block the receptor site and reduce the neurotransmitter's effect.
Fascinating how chemicals can have such precise and powerful effects on our behavior and cognition. Okay, let's zoom out from the single neuron to the main command center itself, the brain. What makes the human brain so special compared to other animals?
Well, in terms of sheer processing power and complex abilities, the key difference is our disproportionately large cerebral cortex.
The cortex, that's the outer wrinkly layer.
Exactly. That folded, convoluted outer layer, sometimes called the bark, is massively expanded in humans compared to other species, relative to our body size. All those wrinkles and folds are nature's way of packing an enormous surface area of cortex into the limited space of the skull.
And that extra surface area is where the magic happens.
That's where our most advanced capabilities reside. Things like complex language, abstract thought, intricate planning, problem solving, forming large and complex social groups, all heavily dependent on the computational power of that large cerebral cortex.
And the cortex isn't just one big blob, it's specialized, right? With different lobes.
Right. It's divided into 4 main lobes in each hemisphere. The frontal lobe, involved in planning, judgment, personality, movement. The parietal lobe, processing sensory information like touch and temperature, spatial awareness. The temporal lobe, hearing, language comprehension, memory. And the occipital lobe, vision.
And besides these lobes, there are also the association areas.
Yes, these are large areas of the cortex that aren't primarily dedicated to just sensory input or motor output. Instead, they integrate information from different areas, linking sensory input with stored memories, enabling higher-level thought processes like learning, thinking, and speaking. They're crucial for making sense of the world.
Now, one of the most mind-bending aspects of brain organization is hemispheric specialization. The idea that the two halves of the brain do different things.
Yes, this largely came to light through studies of split brain patients.
These are people who had the connection between their two brain hemispheres cut.
Yes, specifically the corpus callosum, which is a massive bundle of nerve fibers connecting the left and right cerebral hemispheres. This surgery was sometimes performed in cases of severe, uncontrollable epilepsy to prevent seizures from spreading across the entire brain.
And what did researchers discover when they studied these patients, like the famous case WJ?
They discovered something truly astonishing. Severing that connection essentially creates two separate, independently functioning minds within one skull. Each hemisphere could process information and control actions, but without awareness of what the other hemisphere was doing.
Wait, two separate minds. How did they show that?
Well, remember that generally, the left hemisphere controls language and the right side of the body, while the right hemisphere excels at spatial tasks and controls the left side of the body. And importantly, visual information from the left visual field goes to the right hemisphere, and information from the right visual field goes to the left hemisphere.
Okay, so things are crossed over.
Right, so if they flashed a picture of an object, say a spoon, only to WJ's right visual field.
That info goes to his left language-based hemisphere.
Correct, so he could easily say, I see a spoon, no problem.
But what if they flash the spoon only to his left visual field?
Now the information goes only to his right hemisphere, which typically doesn't have strong language centers. So when asked what he saw, WJ would say, I didn't see anything.
Even though his right brain saw it.
Yes, his right brain saw the spoon, but it couldn't communicate that verbally through the left hemisphere because the connection was cut. But here's the amazing part. If they then asked him to reach under a screen with his left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, and pick out the object he just saw from a group of objects.
He could pick the spoon.
He could pick the spoon correctly.
Yep.
His right hemisphere knew what it saw and could guide his left hand, even though his conscious, verbal self, based in the left hemisphere, had no awareness of having seen anything. It demonstrates a remarkable dissociation of consciousness and ability within one person.
That is truly bizarre. It really highlights how specialized and, in some ways, separate these systems can be. Okay, so we have this incredibly complex brain. How does it actually take in information from the outside world? Let's talk about sensation and perception, maybe focusing on vision as an example.
Vision is a great example of this intricate process. Sensation is the process of receiving stimuli from the environment through our sensory organs. Perception is how the brain organizes and interprets that sensory information to give it meaning.
So for vision, the sensation part starts with light.
Right. Light waves enter the eye through the cornea, which is a clear outer layer. Then it passes through the pupil, the opening in the center.
The size of which is controlled by the iris, the colored part.
Exactly. The iris adjusts the pupil size to let in more or less light. The light then gets focused by the lens onto the back surface of the eye, the retina.
And the retina is where the action happens for sensation.
That's where the light energy gets converted into neural signals. The retina contains millions of photoreceptor cells called rods, which detect brightness and work best in dim light, and cones, which detect color and fine detail, working best in bright light.
And this image projected onto the retina, it's actually upside down and backward.
It is, due to the optics of the lens, but our brain automatically flips it right side up during processing, so we perceive the world correctly oriented.
But the brain does more than just flip the image. It actively constructs our perceptions, sometimes filling in gaps we don't even know are there.
Absolutely. Perception is not just passive reception. Take the blind spot.
Where the optic nerve leaves the eye.
Exactly. At that point on the retina, there are no rods or cones, so there's literally a hole in the visual field of each eye where we cannot detect light.
But we don't walk around seeing black holes in our vision.
We don't. Because the brain is incredibly clever. It uses the information from the surrounding areas of the retina and information from the other eye to essentially fill in that missing spot. It makes a best guess based on context, so we have a seamless visual experience and are completely unaware of the blind spot unless we do specific tests to find it.
That's amazing. The brain is literally papering over the cracks in our sensory input.
It is. And it's not just filling physical gaps. Our perception is also heavily influenced by our expectations, our experiences, our current state, even our desires. It's an active interpretive process.
Like the example from the sources about wine tasting.
Yes. Studies showed that people rated the exact same wine as tasting significantly better, and brain scans showed more activity in pleasure centers when they were simply told it had a high price tag compared to when they were told it was cheap.
So the expectation of quality, triggered by the price label, literally changed their sensory experience of the wine.
It absolutely did. Our beliefs shape our reality. Similarly, other studies found that if you're hungry, food items actually look perceptually larger or more appealing to you than if you're full. Your internal state biases how you perceive the external world. Perception is not an objective photograph. It's a constructed interpretation.
Okay, moving from the internal machinery of the brain and perception, let's shift our focus outward to how we behave in social contexts. This brings us to social behavior, obedience, and learning, including some of psychology's most classic and sometimes disturbing studies about the power of the situation.
Yes, these studies really highlight how much our behavior can be shaped by external social forces, sometimes overriding our own personal beliefs or values. We should probably start with conformity.
Explain what the group does. And the classic study here is Solomon Ash's experiment from 1951.
That's the one. Ash wanted to see if people would conform to a group's opinion, even when that opinion was clearly wrong. He set up a simple visual judgment task. Participants were shown a target line and had to choose which of 3 comparison lines matched it.
But the trick was the participant was in a room with several other people who were actually Confederates, actors working for Ash.
Exactly. And on certain trials, all the Confederates deliberately gave the same, obviously incorrect answer before the real participant had their turn.
So the participant is sitting there, seeing clearly that line B is the match, but everyone before them is saying line C. What happened?
The results were striking. Ash found that a significant number of participants buckled under the group pressure. About 75% of participants conformed to the incorrect majority at least once during the trials, and around a third of participants conformed consistently on the critical trials.
Even though they knew the group was wrong.
Many reported afterwards that they knew the group was wrong but didn't want to stand out, didn't want to cause trouble, or even started to doubt their own judgment. It demonstrated the powerful pull of normative social influence conforming to fit in and be accepted by the group.
We adjust our opinions, or at least our stated opinions, to align with the group's standard. People would rather be wrong with the group than risk being right alone.
It seems so in many situations. That study really underlined the power of social pressure.
And if simple group pressure is that powerful, what about direct orders from an authority figure? That takes us to the infamous Milgram obedience study.
Ah, yes. Stanley Milgram's experiments in the early 1960s took this exploration of social influence to another level, a much more dramatic one.
This is the one with the shock generator.
That's right. Participants were recruited for what they thought was a study on learning and memory. They were assigned the role of teacher and instructed to administer electric shocks of increasing intensity to another participant, the learner, who was actually an actor, whenever the learner made a mistake on a word pairing task.
And the shock generator had labels going up to XXX danger, severe shock.
Yes, very ominous labels. The learner, the actor, would grunt, then complain, and then yell in pain, demand to be let out, and eventually fall silent as the shocks supposedly increased.
But the teacher, the real participant, was instructed by the experimenter, a man in a lab coat, to continue.
Right. If the teacher hesitated, the experimenter used a series of standardized prods like, please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue, and you have no other choice. You must go on.
And the horrifying finding was,
the level of obedience was shocking, pun intended. Milgram found that a staggering 65%, nearly 2/3 of the participants, went all the way to the highest shock level on the generator, even when the learner was screaming in agony or had fallen silent.
65% administered what they believed could be lethal shocks, just because an authority figure told them to.
It was a deeply unsettling demonstration of how powerful the pressure to obey authority can be, even when it conflicts with one's own conscience.
Milgram developed his agency theory from this, didn't he? To explain why people obeyed.
Yes. He proposed that in certain situations, people enter an agentic state. They shift from seeing themselves as acting autonomously, responsible for their own actions, to seeing themselves as merely an agent carrying out the wishes of an authority figure.
So they basically hand over responsibility.
In their minds, yes. They believe the authority figure is legitimate, qualified, and crucially, that the authority figure will accept responsibility for the consequences. This shift allows ordinary people to perform actions they would normally find abhorrent because they feel they are just following orders.
You can see how that applies to understanding atrocities in war or genocide. It provides a framework for how seemingly normal people get drawn into horrific acts.
It's a disturbing but important insight into that dynamic.
And this theme, how the situation can radically transform behavior, was also highlighted by Philip Zimbardo, thinking about his Stanford prison experiment.
Right. Zimbardo reflected on how quickly and dramatically ordinary college students, randomly assigned to be either guards or prisoners in a simulated prison environment, adopted those roles. The guards became authoritarian and abusive, the prisoners passive and distressed, leading to the experiment being shut down early.
He famously described it as seeing how easily ordinary people could be transformed from the good Dr. Jekyll to the evil Mr. Hyde.
Simply by the power of the situation, the assigned role, and the social context they were put in. The environment seemed to overwhelm individual personality and morality in that case.
Okay, so situations can compel us through conformity and obedience. But we also learn by watching others, don't we? That brings us to Albert Bandura and observational learning.
Yes, Bandura's work showed that we learn a lot simply by observing the behavior of others who serve as models. His most famous demonstration of this was the Bobo doll experiment.
The inflatable doll experiment. What did he do?
He worked with young children, around 3 to 6 years old. One group of children watched an adult model behaving aggressively towards a large inflatable Bobo doll, hitting it with a mallet, kicking it, throwing it, yelling aggressive things like, "Suck him in the nose!"
Okay. And another group.
Another group watched an adult model playing quietly and non-aggressively with other toys, ignoring the Bobo doll. And there was a control group that saw no model.
Then the children were put in a ring with the Bobo doll and other toys? What happened?
The results were very clear. The children who had observed the aggressive model were significantly more likely to imitate that aggressive behavior towards the Bobo doll themselves. They hit it, they kicked it, they used the mallet, they even repeated some of the aggressive phrases.
So they learned specific aggressive actions just by watching.
Exactly. They didn't just become generally more aggressive, they imitated the specific novel aggressive responses they had seen the model perform. This showed that modeling is a powerful mechanism for learning complex behaviors, including aggression.
Which, as you noted, is usually adaptive. We learn skills by watching.
Right. Modeling is how we learn countless useful things, from social etiquette to technical skills.
But the flip side is problematic, especially regarding violence.
It is. If children grow up in environments where they frequently observe aggression, whether in the family, among peers, or through media, Bandura's work suggests they're learning how to be aggressive through that observation and are more likely to reproduce that behavior themselves.
Okay, shifting from learning behaviors to how we form judgments about people. Let's talk about the halo effect. This is a cognitive bias, right? An error in thinking.
Yes, the halo effect, first really described by Edward Thorndike, is a classic cognitive bias. It's our tendency for an overall impression of a person, or one particularly strong, positive, or negative trait, to influence our judgments about their other unrelated characteristics.
So if we think someone is physically attractive, we might automatically assume they're also smart, kind, funny, trustworthy.
Exactly. The positive halo from the attractiveness spills over onto our assessment of completely different qualities. The same works in reverse. A negative first impression can cast a negative halo or horns effect, making us assume unrelated negative traits.
Nisbet and Wilson did a clever experiment in 1977 that really demonstrated this bias in action.
They did. They had college students watch videotaped interviews of a college instructor who spoke English with a noticeable Belgian accent.
Okay. What was the manipulation?
There were 2 versions of the interview. In one, the instructor acted very warm, friendly, and enthusiastic, the cordial condition. In the other version, he acted cold, distrustful, and rigid, the inhospitable condition. Importantly, the content of what he said was identical in both versions.
Same words, same accent, just a different demeanor. And then the students rated him.
Yes, they rated him on various characteristics, including his physical appearance, his mannerisms, and even how irritating they found his accent.
And what did they find? Did the demeanor affect ratings of things like his accent?
It absolutely did. When the students saw the cordial instructor, they rated his appearance, his mannerisms, and even his accent as appealing and pleasant. But when they saw the inhospitable instructor, they rated those exact same characteristics, the same face, the same gestures, the same accent, as irritating, unattractive, and annoying.
Wow. So their overall feeling about him, liking him versus disliking him based on his warmth, completely changed how they perceived objective things like his accent.
Precisely. The initial positive or negative halo contaminated all their subsequent judgments. It shows how easily our global impressions can bias our specific evaluations, often without us even realizing it's happening.
This leads us perfectly into what might be the most personally relevant and maybe unsettling area.
Yeah.
The fact that our memory and cognition are often flawed. The idea of memory as an imperfect recording device.
Yes, this is a huge area of research, and the consistent finding is that memory is not like a video camera faithfully recording events. It's not a perfect replication.
So what is it then?
It's much more dynamic, much more reconstructive. Memory is shaped by active cognitive processing, both when we initially encode the information and later when we try to retrieve it. We are constantly rebuilding our past experiences, influenced by our current knowledge, beliefs, and the context of retrieval.
It's not like pulling a file from a cabinet. It's more like rebuilding a story each time.
That's a good analogy. And this dynamic nature is evident when we look at the different types of long-term memory psychologists distinguish between.
Okay, what are the main types?
We broadly distinguish between explicit memory and implicit memory. Explicit memory involves conscious recall. It's the stuff you know.
Like facts for an exam or what you had for breakfast.
Exactly. Explicit memory itself is often divided into semantic memory, our knowledge of facts, concepts, and language, like knowing Paris is the capital of France, and episodic memory, our memory for personal experiences, the events of our lives, like remembering your first day of school. You consciously access these memories.
Okay, so explicit is conscious. What's implicit?
Implicit memory refers to the influence of past experiences on our behavior or performance without us being consciously aware of those previous experiences. It's unconscious influence.
Like what?
The classic example is procedural memory, our memory for skills and how to do things, like riding a bicycle, typing on a keyboard, or driving a car. You can perform these skills often automatically without having to consciously retrieve the steps involved. Other types include priming effects and classical conditioning.
And the distinction between these two systems, explicit and implicit, became incredibly clear from studying people with amnesia, right?
Absolutely. Cases of amnesia provided dramatic evidence. The most famous case is probably patient HM.
Henry Molaison, he had surgery for epilepsy that damaged his hippocampus.
Correct. And as a result, HM developed profound anterograde amnesia. This meant he lost the ability to form new explicit memories after his surgery.
So he couldn't remember new facts or events.
No, he couldn't remember who he met just minutes before. He couldn't learn new vocabulary words. He lived perpetually in the present moment, unable to consciously store new experiences. His explicit memory formation was devastated.
But this is the crucial part. His implicit memory was still working.
Remarkably, yes. Even though he had no conscious memory of doing so, HMO could learn new skills. For instance, researchers had him practice tasks like mirror drawing, tracing a shape while only looking at its reflection.
Which is really hard at first.
Very hard. But HM got progressively better at it over days of practice, just like anyone else would. His performance improved, showing clear evidence of learning.
But if you asked him if he'd ever done the task before,
he would insist every single time that he had never seen the apparatus before and had no memory whatsoever of practicing it. His explicit memory for the learning episodes was gone, but his implicit procedural memory for the skill itself remained intact and could improve.
That's incredible. It's like two separate memory systems operating in parallel, one conscious, one unconscious.
It was profound evidence for that separation and showed just how complex memory really is.
Okay, so knowing memory is this active, reconstructive process, and that there are different systems. Research has also given us some practical techniques to actually improve our learning and memory, right? Based on how these systems work.
Yes, definitely. Since memory relies on active processing, the techniques that work best are those that encourage deeper, more meaningful engagement with the material.
Like elaborative encoding.
Exactly. This means going beyond just passively reading or repeating information. Elaboration involves actively thinking about the meaning of the material, connecting it to things you already know, thinking about examples, maybe comparing and contrasting it with related concepts.
So instead of just memorizing the definition of proactive interference, you'd think about how it's different from retroactive interference and come up with personal examples of each.
Precisely. The more deeply you process the material, the more connections you create in your neural network, the stronger the memory trace will be, and the easier it will be to retrieve later.
And probably the most powerful elaboration strategy involves ourselves.
Yes, the self-reference effect. This is a really robust finding. Material is remembered significantly better if you relate it to yourself, your own experiences, thoughts, or feelings during encoding.
Why does that work so well?
The idea is that our self-concept is probably the richest, most complex, and most frequently accessed knowledge structure we have. Linking new information to this well-established structure makes it more memorable and easier to find later. So asking, how does this concept apply to my life, is a very effective study strategy.
Okay, what else? We know cramming isn't ideal.
Definitely not. The spacing effect is another crucial principle. It shows that learning is much more effective, especially for long-term retention, when study sessions are spaced out over time rather than massed together in one long cramming session.
So studying an hour a day for 4 days is better than studying for 4 hours straight the night before the exam.
Much better for durable memory. Spacing likely allows for memory consolidation processes to occur between sessions and highlights areas that need more work. And related to this is the idea of overlearning.
Keep practicing even after you think you know it.
Yes. Continuing to practice or review material even after you've initially mastered it, it significantly improves long-term retention and makes the knowledge more automatic and resistant to forgetting. Don't just stop when you first get it right. Keep going a bit longer.
What about where or how you study? Does the context matter for retrieval?
It can. This relates to context-dependent retrieval and state-dependent retrieval. The basic idea is that retrieval is often better when the conditions at retrieval match the conditions at encoding.
So if you learn something underwater, you'll remember it better underwater. That was a classic study, wasn't it?
It was. And more practically, studying in the same room where you'll take the test might provide subtle contextual cues that aid recall. Similarly, state-dependent retrieval suggests that if you learn something in a particular psychological state, like happy, sad, or even under the influence of caffeine, you might recall it better if you're back in that same state later.
So maybe don't rely on being intoxicated to take your exams.
Probably not our recommended strategy. But the principle holds. Matching the encoding and retrieval environments, both external and internal, can boost memory.
Finally, there's the serial position curve. Where things appear in a list matters.
Yes. When people are asked to recall a list of items they just learned, they tend to remember items from the beginning of the list, the primacy effect, and items from the end of the list, the recency effect, better than items from the middle.
Why does that happen?
The primacy effect is thought to occur because early items get more rehearsal and are more likely to transfer into long-term memory. The recency effect happens because the last few items are still fresh in short-term or working memory when recall begins. The poor items in the middle suffer because they don't get extensive rehearsal and are no longer in working memory.
Okay, so we have ways to improve memory, but we also know memory is prone to errors and biases. We rely on schemas, right? These mental frameworks or patterns of knowledge.
We do. Schemas are incredibly useful. They help us organize information, make sense of the world quickly, and know what to expect in familiar situations, like having a schema for going to a restaurant.
You know the basic script. Wait to be seated, get menus, order, eat, pay.
Exactly. It saves mental effort. But schemas can also lead us astray. Because they represent typical patterns, they can sometimes cause us to falsely remember things that didn't happen, but that are consistent with the schema.
Like remembering seeing magazines in a waiting room, even if there weren't any, because magazines are part of your waiting room schema.
Precisely. We might fill in the gaps in our memory with schema-consistent, but ultimately incorrect details.
And besides schemas, we use heuristics, those mental shortcuts. They're usually efficient, but they lead to predictable biases.
Right. Heuristics are cognitive rules of thumb that let us make judgments quickly without having to do exhaustive analysis. But they can definitely trip us up.
Like the representativeness heuristic.
Yes. This is when we judge the likelihood of something based on how well it seems to match or represent a particular prototype or stereotype in our minds, often ignoring base rate information, how common it actually is.
The example often used is thinking someone who is quiet, wears glasses, and likes poetry is more likely to be a classics professor than a truck driver.
Exactly. Even though there are vastly more truck drivers than classics professors, the base rate, the description seems more representative of our stereotype of a professor, so we might incorrectly judge that as more probable.
And this also leads to the gambler's fallacy, right?
Yes. That's a classic example of misusing representativeness. After a fair coin comes up, heads 5 times in a row, many people feel strongly that tails is due on the next flip.
Because the sequence of HHH doesn't look random.
Right. It doesn't match our prototype of a random sequence, which we expect to be more mixed. So we judge tails as more likely, ignoring the fact that each coin flip is independent and the probability is always 50-50, regardless of what happened before.
Okay, then there's the availability heuristic.
This is another major one. We tend to judge the frequency or likelihood of an event based on how easily examples of it come to mind. If something is readily available in our memory, perhaps because it was recent, vivid, or frequently reported, we assume it must be common.
Like overestimating the risk of plane crashes because they get intense media coverage when they happen, even though statistically, flying is very safe.
Exactly. Plane crashes are highly memorable and available in our minds, so we overestimate their frequency compared to less dramatic but statistically more common risks like car accidents. Or thinking crime is rampant because local news constantly reports incidents, making those examples highly available.
Our judgments are swayed by what's easy to recall, not necessarily what's objectively most frequent. Perhaps the most worrying cognitive failure is how easily memory can be distorted by external suggestion, the misinformation effect.
Yes. This research, pioneered by Elizabeth Loftus, is incredibly important. It shows that memories are not only reconstructive, but also highly malleable and susceptible to contamination by information encountered after the event occurred.
This was shown in her famous car accident studies.
Right. In one classic study, participants watched a film of a car accident. Later, they were asked questions about it. The critical manipulation was the verb used in the question about speed.
Some were asked about how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other.
Exactly. Others were asked the same question, but with verbs like collided, bumped, hit, or contacted.
And just changing that one word changed their memory.
Significantly, participants who heard the word smashed estimated the car speeds as much faster than those who heard hit or contacted. The implication was that the word smashed introduced post-event information that actually altered their memory of the accident itself, making it seem more severe.
And a week later, the smash group was also more likely to falsely remember seeing broken glass at the scene, even though there wasn't any.
Correct. The misinformation embedded in the question reshaped their memory of the event.
This has huge implications for eyewitness fallibility.
Absolutely massive. Eyewitness testimony is incredibly persuasive in courtrooms, but research like this shows just how unreliable it can be. Memories can be distorted by leading questions from police, conversations with other witnesses, media reports, all sorts of post-event information.
And critically, the witness can be extremely confident in their mistaken memory, right?
That's one of the most troubling findings. Confidence is often a poor indicator of accuracy. Someone can be absolutely certain they are identifying the right person or recalling an event correctly, yet be completely wrong.
The case of Jennifer Thompson, mentioned in the sources, is a powerful example.
It's a tragic and compelling case. She was raped and later confidently identified Ronald Cotton as her attacker in a lineup and in court. Her testimony was key to his conviction.
But she was wrong.
She was tragically wrong. Years later, DNA evidence exonerated Cotton and identified the real perpetrator, Bobby Poole. Jennifer Thompson had formed a strong, confident, but ultimately false memory under traumatic circumstances, likely influenced by subtle cues during the identification procedures. It underscores the real-world dangers of relying too heavily on eyewitness memory without understanding its inherent fallibility.
Okay, let's shift to our final major section, looking at how we become who we are, development and personality. We need to touch on some key developmental frameworks, starting with Jean Piaget.
Piaget was a giant in developmental psychology, focusing on cognitive development, how children's thinking changes as they grow. He saw children as active learners, like little scientists, constantly trying to make sense of the world.
And they do this by developing schemas. We talked about those earlier.
Yes, Piaget used that term too. Schemas are mental frameworks or concepts that help us organize and interpret information. Children develop schemas based on their experiences, and then they either assimilate new information into existing schemas or accommodate their schemas to fit new information that doesn't quite match.
And he proposed that children move through distinct stages of cognitive development.
Right. He proposed a sequence of stages: sensoromotor, pre-operational, concrete operational, formal operational, each characterized by different ways of thinking and different cognitive abilities emerging in a predictable order. While some details of his stage theory have been debated, his core idea of children actively constructing their understanding remains hugely influential.
Then there's Erik Erikson, who took a more psychosocial approach to development.
Erikson focused on social and emotional development across the entire lifespan, not just childhood. He proposed that humans pass through 8 psychosocial stages, from infancy to old age.
And each stage involves a crisis.
Yes. Each stage presents a unique developmental challenge or crisis that needs to be resolved. The outcome of each crisis, whether positive or negative, influences personality development and the ability to tackle the crisis of the next stage.
Like in school age, the crisis is industry versus inferiority.
Exactly. During these years, roughly ages 6 to 12, children are focused on developing a sense of competence industry by mastering academic and social skills valued by their culture. If they succeed and feel capable, they develop a sense of industry.
And if they struggle or face constant criticism,
They may develop feelings of inferiority, inadequacy, and incompetence, which can hinder their confidence moving forward. Successfully resolving this crisis, feeling industrious, helps prepare them for the next big challenge in adolescence: identity versus role confusion.
where the focus shifts to figuring out, who am I?
Precisely. Erickson's model provides a valuable framework for understanding development as a lifelong process of resolving key social and emotional challenges.
Moving to early social development, the concept of attachment styles is crucial. This comes largely from Mary Ainsworth's research.
Yes, Ainsworth built on John Bowlby's attachment theory. Her work, using the strange situation procedure, dramatically illustrated the importance of the early bond between an infant and their primary caregiver.
The strange situation involved observing infants' reactions to separations and reunions with their caregiver in an unfamiliar playroom.
Right. Based on the patterns of behavior observed, Ainsworth identified distinct attachment styles, suggesting that a successful, secure attachment is vital for healthy development.
And she found different patterns, with pretty consistent proportions across cultures.
Remarkably consistent, yes. The most common style, around 60% of infants, is secure attachment. These infants use the caregiver as a secure base to explore, show distress when the caregiver leaves, but are easily comforted and happy upon reunion.
That sounds like the healthy ideal. What about the insecure styles?
There are a few types. About 15% show avoidant attachment. These infants seem indifferent to the caregiver's presence, don't get upset when they leave, and avoid contact upon reunion. Another 10% or so show ambivalent or anxious resistant attachment. They are very distressed by separation, but then act ambivalently upon reunion, perhaps clinging but also resisting convert, seeming angry.
And there's a fourth category.
Yes. Later research identified disorganized attachment, seen in about 15%. These infants lack a consistent strategy for coping with the stress. They might show contradictory behaviors, seem confused, fearful, or dazed. This style is often associated with difficult home environments or trauma.
And these early attachment styles are thought to influence relationships later in life.
They're believed to form internal working models of relationships, expectations about trust, intimacy, and responsiveness that can significantly shape the quality of friendships and romantic partnerships in adulthood.
Okay, let's pivot to personality itself. The relatively stable patterns of thinking, feeling, and behaving that make us individuals. The dominant approach today seems to be the five-factor model, or the Big Five.
Yes, the Big Five is currently the most widely accepted and researched trait model of personality. It suggests that most individual differences in personality can be captured by 5 broad dimensions.
Can you list them for us?
Sure. They are often remembered by the acronym OCEAN or CANOE: openness to experience, curiosity, creativity versus caution, consistency; conscientiousness, organized, dependable versus easygoing, careless; extroversion, outgoing, energetic versus solitary, reserved; agreeableness, cooperative, trusting versus antagonistic, suspicious; and neuroticism, sensitive, anxious versus secure, confident.
People score somewhere along the continuum for each of these 5 traits.
Exactly. It's not about being one type or another, but about having a unique profile across these 5 dimensions.
Let's focus on neuroticism for a moment, as it's often highlighted. What does scoring high on that dimension really mean?
Neuroticism reflects the tendency to experience negative emotions, things like anxiety, anger, sadness, vulnerability, frequently and intensely. People high in neuroticism tend to perceive ordinary situations as more threatening, minor frustrations as overwhelmingly difficult, and they generally experience more psychological distress and difficulty coping with stress compared to those low in neuroticism, who tend to be more emotionally stable and resilient.
Okay, so that's a way to describe personality traits. But where do these traits come from? That brings us to the role of genetics versus environment.
Right, the classic nature versus nurture debate. And behavioral genetics, particularly through twin studies and adoption studies, has shed a lot of light on this.
Twin studies compare identical twins who share 100% of their genes with fraternal twins who share about 50% on average, like regular siblings.
Correct. And adoption studies compare adopted children to both their biological parents, shared genes, and their adoptive parents' shared environment. By looking at how similar twins or adoptees are on personality traits, researchers can estimate the heritability, the proportion of variation in the trait that's attributable to genetic differences.
And what's the general finding for personality traits like the Big Five?
The consistent finding, which surprises many people, is that genetics plays a substantial role. For most personality traits, heritability estimates are typically in the range of 40–50%. This means a significant chunk of the variation we see in personality across the population is due to genetic factors.
So identical twins raised in different families still end up being quite similar in personality.
Remarkably similar, yes, often more similar to each other than fraternal twins raised in the same family. This strongly suggests that shared family environment, the parenting style, the home atmosphere, actually has less influence on shaping core personality traits than was traditionally assumed. Genetics seems more influential than shared upbringing for many traits.
If shared environment isn't the biggest environmental factor, what is? If genes account for, say, half the variation, where does the other half come from?
That's the really fascinating part. Most of the environmental influence seems to come from what behavioral geneticists call non-shared environmental effects.
Non-shared, meaning things that siblings in the same family don't share.
Exactly. These are the unique experiences that each individual has, even within the same family. Different friends, different teachers, different illnesses or accidents, maybe differential treatment by parents, chance encounters, unique life events. These idiosyncratic, often unpredictable experiences seem to be much more important in shaping personality differences than the broad environment shared by siblings.
So it's not just nature or nurture, but nature in a very specific, almost random kind of nurture unique to each person.
That seems to be the picture emerging. Our genes set a certain potential or predisposition, but our final personality is heavily shaped by the unique path our life takes, the specific environmental niches we occupy, and the chance events we encounter along the way. It suggests destiny isn't rigidly fixed by genes or family alone, but unfolds through a complex interplay with these non-shared experiences.
Wow. We have covered an incredible amount of ground today. We started with the very structure of scientific inquiry in psychology, empiricism, determinism, testability, parsimony, the rules needed to study the mind rigorously.
Then we moved into the biological machinery, the nervous system, the all-or-nothing action potential of neurons, the chemical dance of neurotransmitters across the synapse, and the amazing specialization within the brain, particularly that all-important cerebral cortex, and even how the brain fills in gaps like the blind spot.
We saw how perception itself isn't objective, but actively constructed and biased by expectations, like the wine tasting or how hungry you are.
And then we really dove into the power of the social world. The pressure to conform, shown by Ash, the disturbing levels of obedience to authority Milgram found, leading to agency theory. Plus, how readily we learn complex behaviors, including aggression, just by watching others, as Bandura showed.
We explored cognitive biases like the halo effect, where one impression taints everything else, and then the fallibility of memory. It's not a recording, it's reconstructive. We have different systems like explicit and implicit seen so clearly in HM.
And while we can use techniques like elaboration and spacing to improve memory, it's constantly prone to errors from schemas, heuristics like representativeness and availability, and the deeply concerning misinformation effect, which has huge implications for things like eyewitness testimony.
We touched on developmental frameworks like Piaget's cognitive stages and Erikson's psychosocial crises, the importance of early attachment styles, and finally, the Big Five model of personality, where genetics plays a huge role, but so do those unique, non-shared environmental factors. It's been a deep dive indeed. We've seen how complex we are, how influenced by both internal biology and external situations, and how flawed our own cognitive processes can often be. Which brings us to a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on.
Right. We've seen how powerful the social situation can be, making people conform against their judgment or obey destructive orders. And we've seen how inherently fallible our individual cognition is prone to memory distortions, biases like the halo effect relying on mental shortcuts.
So the question to ponder is this: how might those inherent biases and fallibilities in our individual perception and memory actually work to reinforce those powerful social patterns, like conformity or prejudice?
Could it be that our tendency to rely on heuristics, to be swayed by available examples, or to let one negative trait color our whole judgment of a group, like in prejudice? Could these individual cognitive errors be part of what fuels and sustains those larger social pressures?
Is the fallibility inside our heads continually feeding the problematic patterns out there in the world? Something to think about, that constant, often unseen interplay between our limited individual minds and the powerful social forces around us. We encourage you to keep exploring that connection.